And he said, I really want to know what you think. And I said, well, one thing we have established over the years is the most important thing in your life is Eastern, and the most important thing in my life is Eastern. And I think you'd do more for Eastern in the state Senate than anybody that they've ever had up there. And he said, well, thanks. He says, I was hoping you'd say that. But I thought that was a great compliment for somebody to want to know what I really thought.
Of course, his Senate campaign, I remember Mrs. Martin said that she knew he was serious about running for office when he would call the bank time and temperature number, you know, that automated thing, and he would thank the recording for that. But in terms of his political astuteness, when he retired in 1976, the grateful alumni of this institution had a fundraiser and they were far more successful to get him a retirement gift, and they were far more successful than I think they ever anticipated. And they raised enough money, they gave the Martins as a retirement gift a brand new 1976 Cadillac. Yeah. Well, when he got ready to run for the Senate, he didn't do any campaigning in that Cadillac. He went and rented an old beat-up Chevy. Yeah. And that's what he did his campaigning throughout the senatorial district in, was that old Chevrolet.
After he became a senator, one of his appointments is he was on the State Oral History Commission. And I never made a proposal to him that I didn't get what I asked for. And I think he had a lot to do with that. But I remember the first oral history meeting I went to, after he was on the commission, when it was over, he said, Bill, just a minute. He said, do you have your car? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I don't have mine. He says, I wonder if you'd give me a ride back to the Capitol. And I was wondering why he'd do that. Well, when we got back there, he wanted me to go in the garage. And down in there, he wanted to show me his parking spot where it says Senator Robert R. Martin. He said, it's right next to the elevator. He really was a very interesting man. And I'd hear so many good, interesting stories about him from people like, Spider Thurman and Henry Price, people who traveled with him. And some of the stories would be funny and some of them wouldn't be. Well, it was just a wonderful, he was a human being, and I'm always amazed by somebody who you wouldn't think that would be paying him a tribute. But I have a good friend, Jack Cook, who taught here a couple of years. And Jack has gone on, and he lives in Nashville now. And he calls me about, twice a month on Sundays we talk. When he always talks about Dr. Martin and talks about, he says, you and I are right. He was the right man for the right job at the right time. And I think Eastern's been lucky about that in a good bit with presidents. But he really was perfect guy. And I'll give you an example. I don't know if I've ever told you this. I probably have, because you and I have known each other a long time. But one night in our living room, Marion and I and Clyde and Clara Lewis and George and Norma Robinson were sitting there. And John DeMarcus, a former student of ours, who was administrative assistant to Governor Nunn, was over there. And he was over there, he wanted me to get those people there. And what he was doing was offering Clyde Lewis the job as the first president of Northern Kentucky University. And Clyde said that he'd like to do it, but John had to go over and talk to Dr. Martin first, because he said, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life fighting Martin for this, that, and the other thing on that level. So John went over to see Dr. Martin, and we waited, and he came back. And he said, Dr. Martin didn't think you'd be very good, Clyde. But he named 3 or 4 other administrators at Eastern who thought he would be good. And of course, I knew, and George knew, that Clyde
didn't want to fight
Clyde
either.
Clyde was the strongest man on Eastern's campus, and he didn't want to.
Yeah.
He didn't want to fight Clyde, but he knew how strong Clyde was, because when he reorganized Eastern, he gave Clyde Lewis, the strongest man, the job as dean of what should have been the weakest school, because he knew he could do the job.
Took care of it.
You know, you were talking about diversity and things that made Eastern great. One of the things that I think made Eastern great, and this is not from the same perspective that you had, but it's from me as a faculty member. When I came to Eastern as a young faculty member, and I'm talking about the first time in '56 when I started teaching here, and then even in '61 when I came back, the old faculty members in Eastern treated young guys like me like we were equals, and it was really a wonderful thing. It really, you'll not know how important that was. And I think part of it was the way some of the men that were involved in running Eastern taught. Like in the history department, we had a course that you knew about. We called it IF.
Ideological Foundations of Western Civilization.
Now that was Kearney Adams' brainchild. And a lot of people didn't like that. They thought that that wasn't history, it was philosophy and this sort of thing. But you know something? When I took that class, we'd sit around at the big table, the students, and there'd be about 7 or 8 of us. And it was a great books course. We read great books, and we talked about them every week.
Read a book a week and talk about it.
But let me tell you who was also sitting at that table with us. Dr. J.G. Black. He came to those classes. Faculty members from physics and math and chemistry, they'd be sitting in those classes with people like me. And it was incredible. The relationship, and then later on those relationships bore fruit. I can remember some of my best friends on this campus were guys who were like 30 years older than I was. Dorland Coates was one of my best friends. Tom Herndon was a good friend of mine. Dr. Black was a good friend of mine. And I can remember there's things that just, well, I get emotional when I think about them.